I'm now tempted to do a flying elbow drop on this bed. So, since the era of the sheep began in late March, I've been following WrestleMania 36, which I guess I'll eventually get to again. I have reviewed. I'm rambling on here. Since the era of the sheep, I've been going through each and every wrestling, WWF, WWE, well, WWF so far, produced pay-per-view starting from 1985. And I never want to feel like I'm wasting my life having these shows on in the background as I watch them, give them more attention now and again, depending on what wrestler's on. Um, so I've decided to do videos where I rank the shows from each year, starting from 1985, where there was only two, so this should be a very short video. I'm going to rank them anyways. So it starts off with WrestleMania, the very first WrestleMania from 1985, March 31st to be exact, from Madison Square Garden. I have talked about WrestleMania, the original, a number of times. I did a whole set in 2018 looking at every single WrestleMania and the matches. So I have given my opinions before. So it starts off with Tito Santana against the Executioner in the very first WrestleMania match. Not much to say about this match. I think it was the last time we saw this incarnation of the Executioner on any WWF pay-per-view. There was another Executioner wrestler that popped up later on in late 1996, but it's not the same guy. So Tito Santana gets the win here. He was like one of the workhorses of the golden age of the World Wrestling Federation. Match number 2 was a squash match. I've nothing against squash matches. I actually prefer these squash matches quick and to the point rather than the long Iron Man. Even if you've got Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart in the ring, we'll get to WrestleMania 12 eventually, but Iron Man matches and wrestling matches, which you know the result for, tend to be quite boring on a rewatch. So I'm all for these squash matches. But not much to write about it here. ST Jones is squashed, and why I can't remember if he pops up again in a wrestling pay-per-view, where he gets squashed here by King Kong Bundy, whom would go on to headline WrestleMania 2 with Hulk Hogan. The next match is Ricky Steamboat versus Matt Bourne. Another not much going on here type of match. It got 4 minutes 38 seconds, according to Wikipedia, which I'm looking at now, just to make sure I don't miss anything out. Ricky Steamboat, another one of the workhorses, so to speak. I preferred him to Tito Santana. I'm still not the biggest Steamboat mark by any means. I don't think he has much personality, but that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. Matt Bourne, I like. He was my favourite original Doink the Clown. I liked Doink the Clown best when he was that evil Doink the Clown, as originally intended. Now on to one of the most boring wrestling matches of all time. I'm not going to give it much time. Brutus Beefcake versus David Sammartino. You will feel like you're wasting your life watching this match. Moving on to Junkyard Dog and Greg the Hammer Valentine for the Intercontinental Championship. Junkyard Dog was a big personality in the 80s wrestling. Greg Valentine, he's in there. He's in that club that with Tito Santana and Ricky Steamboat. Great in-ring work. and probably an underrated guy too, Greg the Hammer Valentine. It was a passable match. It was fine. The crowd were really into it too. One of the big moments that happened at this specific WrestleMania was the title change in the next matchup between the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, taking on the US Express, which included Barry Windham and Bray Wyatt's dad, Mike Rotundo, who would go on to become Erwin R. Seister. Mike Rotundo had absolutely no personality in the backstage interview, but I really think his work, personality-wise, promo-wise, really improved with his character Erwin R. Seister. He was a decent in-ring worker here, and you'd have to say this was one of the highlights of the original WrestleMania. The Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov getting the win here, to the crowd's dismay. Next up was the Career versus $1,500 Body Slam Challenge BS match, just a gimmick. Andre the Giant versus Big John Studd, who was managed by Bobby the Brain Heenan. Bobby the Brain Heenan was the MVP of the golden age of wrestling. I think he has to be in the top 5 all-rounders when it comes to the wrestling in general. I'd go as far. Bobby the Brain Heenan would be in my top 5. He just had it all. Charisma. He got you involved in the matches. Andre the Giant gets the win here with a big slam on Big John Studd. The slam heard around the world apparently. Kind of got overshadowed a couple of years later when Hogan slammed Andre, but yeah, Andre the Giant, he wasn't an attraction. It was more about the attraction rather than the in-ring skills. He still is a massive name in the wrestling world. Wendy Richter defeated Leilani Kai for the Ladies Women's Championship, whatever they were calling it back then. Cyndi Lauper was here in attendance, managing Wendy Richter. The match was garbage. I can't defend it. It was still, Wendy Richter, I will say, even though this was before my time, Wendy Richter, I've learned, and just by the crowd noise, was over. So despite the match being garbage, I can understand it being high up in the card because she was one of the most over performers here on the show. The main event featured the immortal Hulk Hogan, as my voice breaks, teaming up with Mr. T to take on Roddy Piper, who was in that film They Live, not to mention the C word at all. Swiftly moving on, let's not go there. When we go to these videos on my PMDB free channel and I'm talking about fake fights, the professional wrestling business, the sports entertainment, whatever you want to call it, we're not going to talk about anything to do with politics. And anytime I start going down that path of political views, I'm going to give myself a stone cold stunner and make sure I don't go down that path. Here, people kind of escape and go back to a time, and just a time when there was no restrictions, or not so many restrictions. So Roddy Piper from They Live teamed up with Paul Orndorff, Mr. Wonderful. Muhammad Ali was here. Pat Patterson was the in-ring referee. Muhammad Ali, I'm not sure how much he got paid for this show, but he didn't have much to do. He really didn't have much to do. I do not enjoy watching this. I enjoy, I think WrestleMania 1 flies by for the most part, and it's overall an entertaining show, but I really do not enjoy watching this match. It's all over the place. And I love big fan, Hulk Hogan, big fan of Piper, but I'm not a fan of having a celebrity in a match, Mr. T. Paul Orndorff's okay. I'd be lying to say I was this big Paul Orndorff mark. I'm not. Again, this was during a time when I wasn't even alive yet. But I still look back and appreciate these times because this was around the time, more so 1987, but this was around the time when wrestling was getting put on the map in a way it had never been before. So overall, I'd give WrestleMania 6 out of 10. Moving on to the Wrestling Classic. The Wrestling Classic took place at the Rosemount Horizon, Illinois, November 7th, 1985. It was the first November pay-per-view, predating the Survivor Series, which would take place 2 years later. Let's have a look, shall we? I've only watched this show a handful or 2 times, I think, now, since starting this ridiculous marathon. Why do I punish myself? I don't know. It's been, yeah. Well, I've literally nothing else better to do at the moment, as you know, yeah. There was a set of first round matches, Adrian Adonis versus Corporal Kitchener, Dynamite Kid versus the Nikolai Volkov. Randy Savage made his pay-per-view debut here, taking on Ivan Putski. Ricky Steamboat took on Davey Boy Smith. Junkyard Dog took on the Iron Sheik. Moondog Spot took on Terry Funk. Tito Santana took on the Magnificent Morocco. And Paul Orndorff took on Bob Orton. This was basically the King of the Ring, just with a different name, the Wrestling Classic. It was the first annual and last ever Wrestling Classic. I don't think it worked. Overall, I gave this a 5 out of 10. The quarter-final matches consisted of the Dynamite Kid taking on Adrian Adonis, Randy Savage taking on Ricky Steamboat, Junkyard Dog taking on Moondog Spot, and Tito Santana taking on Paul Orndorff. There was also a singles match for the World Wrestling Federation title with Hulk Hogan taking on Roddy Piper. Hulk Hogan defeated Piper by disqualification because Piper could not be pinned or submitted during this era. The semi-final match consisted of... Do I sound bored? I am a bit bored talking about this show. The semi-final match consisted of Randy Savage taking on a Dynamite Kid. And the final, spoiler alert, was the Junkyard Dog and Randy Savage. There was a lot of decent in-ring performers on display here. You know, Ricky Steamboat was back. He took on Davey Boy Smith in a face versus face match in the first round match. Both solid in-ring workers. We had the Dynamite Kid here in a few matches. One of the best in-ring performers of all time. Like I said, the Macho Man Randy Savage steals the show. He's in the most matches. This became like his show, if you will. And he definitely was the highlight of the show. The charisma was just oozing from him already here. And he would go on to have WrestleMania 4 moment years later, and that was a tournament as well. At the time, Hulk Hogan and Roddy Piper were your 2 biggest stars, and they had a fairly entertaining match. As for the tournament overall, I think it sucked, and I only give it a 5 out of 10. Like I say, the first and last ever Wrestling Classic. There's a lot of names appeared here that I don't think appeared in a WWF pay-per-view show again, like Ivan Putski. I don't think was involved in a wrestling show again, pay-per-view wise. Moondog Spot. a lot of these wrestlers would be involved in the television shows, but not many would feature on the actual WWF pay-per-view shows. Wrestling Classic technically was the first actual pay-per-view. WrestleMania was what they called a closed circuit deal with a limited pay-per-view audience, I believe. Anyways, I'm going by what the network tells me. And according to the WWE Network, there was 2 pay-per-view events in 1985. So in second place, the Wrestling Classic, I really never want to watch again. And in first place, WrestleMania. WrestleMania was the greatest show of 1985.